It's October 7th, 2014. It's Tuesday. It's Harp Tuesday! I know it's been such a long time, and I've been busy, and I just haven't had any inspiration for topics. But today, we're back, and what I'm going to talk about is a fairly brief episode on playing with other people, and some exercises that you can do if that's something that maybe gives you problems or you haven't done much of. The interesting thing with a harp, of course, is that we get to play, like the piano, we get to play both harmony and melody. We get to play a bunch of notes at the same time. So in a way, we don't need other instruments. We don't need no other instruments. We can just do perfectly well playing on our own. So unlike something like the violin, for example, where you're probably playing with other people quite early on in terms of learning the violin, with a harp, you might be able to play quite well, right? Like you might be playing complicated music and still not have a lot of experience playing in a group with other people. And that's a very specific skill, right? It's sure, you're playing music, and obviously it helps if you can, play loud and fast and even, but it's also sort of a skill all on its own. And at some point I do want to talk specifically about orchestral playing, but this is just looking at two aspects of playing with people and some exercises or some ideas you can use to practice that. So when we play with a group, there are two things that are perhaps slightly different than when we're just playing on our own. And the first is, of course, we need to hear and find the beat, the pulse. We need to be with everybody else and be able to hear that beat. And the second, of course, is that it's like a train. Nobody's stopping for us, right? We can't take a moment to, oh, wait a minute, what do I do next, right? They're just going on. There's that runaway train or horse or whatever, that we don't have a lot of leeway in we have to, just keep going, or if something happens, we have to skip ahead and recover. So for the first, let's talk about that idea of the beat. And actually, I think the last episode was talking about rhythm, right? And the pulse, right? The pulse, and we use math, we use numbers to describe rhythm a lot of the time, right? We counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and how it's all broken down. But really, it's what we want is that pulse within ourselves, that beat. And for some people, it's really easy to pick it out and to hear it. And for other people, not as much. But the thing is, no matter where you are, you can always get better with practice. And it's one thing to be playing and maybe feeling a pulse, but it's another thing to be listening and hearing that pulse. So the first exercise I would suggest would be to listen to some music, presumably of the type of style that you're wanting to play. So if you're playing in an orchestra, listen to orchestral music. If you're playing in a harp ensemble, listen to whatever music they're playing. So maybe if it's Celtic music, listen to Celtic music. If it's classical music, listen to classical music, etc. But so you'll have those rhythms and those sounds of the style of music that you're wanting to play in your ear. And as you're listening to it, try and find the big a pulse. A fairly not super fast and not super slow, but just a pulse. So for example, in a waltz, you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and try. My hands showing up. Try and clap, for example, along with it. And don't even bother counting, right? What we're looking for is to ingrain that pulse in our body. Or maybe even stand up and, stomp your feet. Is it a march? 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. Just big body movements so that you're really feeling that pulse, as they say, so that it's not an intellectual exercise of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, that it's really within your body. Dance along to it or whatever. But I think the idea of clapping, some nice big claps, is great. And see, some music is harder than others to find that beat, right? Even within classical music, some classical music, it's very clear. It's very easy. There's the beat. Maybe it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And others, maybe people are stretching. It's not a totally steady pulse, and maybe there's weird rhythms going on, a little harder to find. So start somewhere where, don't give yourself too big a challenge, right? If if you're not quite sure how easy it's going to be for you to find the beat, look for something where it is just like a 1, 2, 3, 4, and see if you can find that, right? And move from there. But just that clapping and finding that beat. And then, if you get to the point where you're feeling pretty good about that, you could try just being at your harp and, playing this music, having this music on your sound system, and then see if you can, you could of course tap your harp soundboard, or maybe just lightly play some string, doesn't matter what string, but just to now kind of get the idea of hearing that beat and then translating it into movements on our instrument, right? That feeling that pulse on our instrument. So those are some ways to maybe try to train one's ear to pick up the pulse and to train one's body to feel that pulse. And then let's talk about some things we can do in terms of preparing ourselves for playing in a group. And as I say, it can feel like, just rolling down the hill out of control or something, where maybe we have no time. It's like there's so much stuff going on, overload of sensation, overload of inputs. And now, maybe you're playing in a duo with somebody who's really experienced, right? Maybe your teacher, and they're going to be able to slow down or speed up and accommodate you. Great. That's a great place to start, right? In terms of developing that ability to play with other people, because they're going to be able to adjust you. But once you start getting larger groups, there's no possibility of adjusting for each individual player. Everyone has to keep up with, with the conductor or whatever, with this sort of group pulse, so that we need to be able to go on. And of course, this is great practice for just performing in general, right? That idea that it can be so tempting when we're playing. We make a mistake, oops, and we want to go back and correct it. And when we're performing, we just need to keep going. And so this is something that is great when you're performing solo. You should be doing that when you're performing solo, but it's essential when we're playing with a group. And also, of course, ideally, we're able to, if something happens, if we get out of sync, we're able to get back in, right? Because with a group, you're always stressed for time, in terms of there's never enough time to rehearse as much as one would want. So the less one has to stop, the better during a rehearsal, right? And so being able to have that ability to make a mistake, get lost a little bit, and then come back in again is really, really valuable. Because oftentimes the group's not going to stop for you, right? You're just going to keep going, and so you need to be able to pick up and keep going as well. So one exercise would be to take a piece you know somewhat well, or quite well, I would guess, simplify it if you need to, or whatever, and play it with a metronome, right? And tell yourself you're going to keep going, right? Force yourself to keep going. Stick with that metronome. Something happens, just stick with that metronome, right? Stick with that beat, stick with that pulse. And if you can, slight extra layer of complexity, you could be counting along with it. And so if you make a mistake, try and remember, okay, like 1, 2, 3, 4, something like 1, 2, 3. Oh, here we are back again, 1, 2, 3, 4. Try and skip ahead or whatever to get where the beat would be had you kept playing, perfectly. That's hard to do without any external surroundings to show you what's been happening, which we'll talk about in a moment. But in any case, just force yourself to keep going, right? It's great practice for anything, to use that metronome as a way to just keep going, right? You make a mistake, nope, that's fine, can't stop to think about it, don't worry about it, just keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. So great, that's one exercise. And the other is to play along with a recording. Actually, a couple years ago, I did that episode where I recorded 2 parts of a harp duet, and like you can play along with either part, which is an option. But even with an orchestral, if you're trying to do an orchestral piece, play along with the orchestra. Or try and find of course with YouTube there's so many recordings out there, try and find a recording maybe you're playing a piece with your harp ensemble. Maybe there's not a recording of a harp ensemble playing it, but maybe there's a recording of somebody else playing it, hopefully in the same key, and try and play along with that. And that will give you, it's not the same thing, right? When you are in a group, there is that give and take. There is that fact that you're all kind of a group mind going on. It's definitely not quite as, when you're playing with the recording, it's really harsh, right? Again, it's not stopping for you, right? You just gotta go for it. But there's no conductor, there's no sense of breathing with everybody, so it's more difficult, usually, than playing with a group. But if you can do that, right, if you can play along with this recording, it's really gonna make it a lot easier when you're playing with a group, because you've gotten used to that idea of how it sounds. Again, the ideal situation is when you're playing along with an actual recording of the group setting that you're going to be in. And again, this can provide a framework so that if you make a mistake, you get to practice that ability to scramble, and maybe your chords are continuing, and then find yourself back in that piece where, despite getting lost, despite something happening, you're able to get back into that piece. So a great kind of practice that way. So I hope those give you some interesting ideas to think about in terms of playing with other people. And great to be back. I'll see you in a couple weeks' time. Cheers.